Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. Before I begin this video and you'd like to use, OCD Recovery's coaching services, please reach out to Phil at ocdrecovery.com and he'll get back to you as quick as he can. So yeah, today guys, I just wanted to speak about some realities of the recovery journey. Now, when I was on the journey, what happened was I didn't really live in reality, right? I didn't accept that I had a serious brain disorder, and that didn't help me because all of the symptoms and everything that I was going through, like, it pulled me further away from acceptance, right? And when you're on the journey now, there are some things that you are going to have to accept, right? And I'll go over those in a moment, but failure to really align with what's going on and failure to really come to terms with the realities of the journey is just going to make you resistant to what's going on inside you, and that resistance is going to keep everything fueled up, and it's going to just prolong your agony in many ways. So there are lots of different realities in the recovery journey across the board that I faced, that all the other coaches faced, and just, things that we have to be aware of, right? So one of the first realities is that OCD is a resilient disorder, right? You need to give it that respect that it deserves, right? And if you don't give it that respect, then OCD is going to disrespect you. It's going to make time for you. If you don't make time for OCD, it's going to make time for you. And I took it lightly for a long period of time. I didn't realize the severity of the condition that I actually had, right? And I took it lightly for a long period of time. There were times when I would coast for 3 to 4 months, when I was about 6 months into the journey, because I thought, I've got some relief from symptoms here. I don't need to keep doing it. It's just going to pass on its own. But chronic severe OCD is brutal. It's relentless. It's every day. It's that grating anxiety and intrusive thoughts, that machine gun-like intensity in your brain and in your chest from the moment you wake up to the moment you go back to sleep. And that is not going to go when you're tackling it from a piecemeal bit part approach. Yeah, a bit of reading here, bit of reading there, an exposure here, an exposure there. No, that is not going to cut it. You need to take it seriously. You need to have some consistency. You need to make sure that you are, chipping away at those fears because of how resilient OCD is, and it needs to have a reason to relent. And it's not going to have a reason to relent if your acceptance isn't being built up and if you're taking it lightly, right? So you've got to take that seriously, right? Have to take that seriously. Another reality is that when you're on the journey, you are not going to feel good, right? You are going to feel the worst that you've felt in your whole life. You're going to feel anxious, you're going to feel hyper aware, you're going to have guilt, you're going to have shame, you're going to have anxiety, you're going to have no sleep, your libido is going to suffer, especially if you're on medications as well. The libido is really going to suffer there, not in all cases, but in some cases. Your mental clarity won't be there. You'll have brain fog, the physical symptoms as well, aches. For me, I had really bad stomach issues like nausea, acid reflux, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, gargling in the stomach, sort of sharp pains in my chest, thinking that I was going to have a heart attack. And also with anxiety, just that piercing sensation almost in the stomach, in the gut, that just hangs around for a long period of time. And these physical symptoms, like I've said there, give or take, you might be having those or not. Those physical symptoms there are going to be there for a while, right? And I had to really make peace with that and come to terms with that, and truly just allow them to be there without fighting them and without thinking, when are they going to go away? I had to suffer gracefully. I had to have some humility, and OCD is a humbling experience, right? It's absolutely humbling. It will take you to the trenches. It will push you to the very edge. And when I was on that journey, what I'd do was I'd often think in my head about the future when maybe I could have good health, maybe when I was feeling better and everything was repaired, right? But that just pulled me further away from reality. There were times on the journey when I tried to do things to improve my libido. I tried to do things to improve my physical health. And Again, I'm not saying that you can't do that, but when it's coming from the standpoint of, I'm just going to be able to do that and fix it forever because OCD is not going to intervene with that anymore, then that's a problem, right? So OCD is going to really impact the physical health, and I was still picking up the pieces from recovery, even like many months after. I had to take several medications to sort of realign the bacteria in my stomach. L-glutamine to repair my gut because my gut lining was just completely eroded. Those inflammatory responses that I had on the journey. I remember I'd constantly have colds. I would constantly have like green phlegm and mucus. Easily getting ill, easily getting sick, easy coughs. Chronic fatigue, really tired, no virility, no vitality, just very, running on fumes. All right. And even when I was eating the good diet, even when I tried to force myself to go to the gym, my energy was still low because I was fighting that battle in my head. And because that energy is low, it makes it very easy to fall into those habits of not having the life structure and, not going to the gym and not eating the right foods because you think, what's the point? I just want to comfort eat anyway. Right. So you've got to realize that on the journey, your body is going to be pushed to the brink in many cases when it comes to chronic severe OCD. All right. And I had to accept that, and accepting that, I probably wasn't going to feel as good as I could possibly feel for a long period of time. That helped me to take that pressure off of recovering. That helped me to stop that internal fighting of the nervous system because it didn't align with what I wanted in my head. So I had to hold my hands up and say, hey, you know what? I'm probably going to be having my back up against the wall for the time being. My physical and emotional health isn't going to be what it could be if I wasn't going through OCD. And that's when the life acceptance comes in. So you really have to be aligned with what's going on, and not trying to force your way out of that. And again, I'm not saying that you can't ever take things to improve your health or whatever, but when chronic OCD is still involved, it's having that, dose of reality and saying, hey, for the time being, I'm probably not going to feel as good as what I could, right? And that is okay. And that's not only for the physical side of things, that's also, the emotional side of things too. You're going to be irate. You're going to be probably a little bit more angry than usual. When people try and speak to you, you might be a bit more snappy. You're going to be experiencing less happy emotions. Those moments that you might previously enjoy, they might feel a bit dull and they might feel like, you've lost all your interest in them. And your mind is just going to be fixated on where the next trigger is going to come from, and lots of things in life that you would have done normally, or activities that you would have done normally, are going to take a back seat. I remember for me, I barely even focused on my career because I was so concerned about OCD. I was so concerned about where the next trigger was coming from. I was so hyper aware of how I felt. Lots of other things fell by the wayside, and that was my career, right? I didn't really progress in my career. I had lots of job churn because of how anxious I felt. I just didn't think, right, I'm going to give this my all because I had other concerns. It's almost like I had bigger fish to fry in many ways in my mind, and my career suffered, family life suffered, friendship suffered, tons of avoidance, no dating because of, my predicament. I avoided that as well. And the reality is in on the recovery journey, some of these areas can become strained. Even relationships with your partner are OCD. You might be confessing and alienating them, or getting reassurance, or doing compulsions, and you might just naturally be like in a bad spot because of that. Maybe like some trust has eroded. Maybe with your friends, you're avoiding your friends, and because you don't want to be triggered, and they're sort of changing their perception of you, and they're less welcoming of you because they think that you're avoiding them. Family, you might be a bit, like I said, you might be a bit irate, and they don't really want to be around you as much anymore because of how you feel, and they want to leave you alone. And then maybe the family feels a bit guilty as well because they think they're not doing enough and that you're stuck. And there's all of those different dynamics and moving parts. And I had to really accept that some of these areas were going to be impacted, and they wouldn't be ideal as what they could have been if I wasn't on the journey, right? So again, that is a reality of the recovery journey. You're not going to feel the way that you want to feel. You're not going to be feeling that way that you want to feel in your head, and you got to try not to daydream and golf into the future about, when I'm recovered, it's all good. When I'm recovered, that's it. That's when I can be happy. No, you have to try and make the most of what you got now because time is ticking. And I know it's hard, but you got to think like, right, what can I do on a day-to-day basis that's going to move me forward to where I want to get to? How can I accept the sensations? How can I still try and live my life alongside these things? All right. And it's accepting that that, like I said, there are going to be moments when it's going to be affected, like sleep, physical health, mental health, relationships, work. That is going to be affected, all right? So, yeah, just allowing that to happen, and having that realization that, yeah, maybe I'm not going to be firing on all cylinders for the time being, all right? So that's also very important. And then another reality of the journey is that when stuck on the journey, we think of it as like this destination, right? We think of it like we need to catch this train, we need to catch this plane, that once I get that, that's it. But it doesn't really work like that. This is an ongoing process of iteration with your beliefs, with your behaviors, and tools that are going to really help you for the rest of your life, right? So that can't be rushed, right? It's going to take time. We've held these belief systems for a very long period of time, some of the most taboo and sort of alien things to us that you could possibly imagine. And the brain is on red alert. The brain has learned over a period of time before OCD set in, more than likely, that these things are scary, right? You've learned these belief systems, you've held them so rigidly that OCD has had that opportunity to land. So it's going to take time, and it's going to take perseverance to bring yourself back to that baseline level of calm. All right. And I remember what I'd do was I would think that I was, on some kind of timeline in my head, right? So I'd think, once I get to 2 years of recovery, well, that's it, I made recovery. But it doesn't work like that. I was almost hyper aware of how often I spent recovering, and that was when fear was really getting in, because it was like, when I recover. But like I said, there's no plane to catch, there's no train to arrive. Recovery is a natural transition where you can't even tell how you've moved from the state of being anxious to non-anxious, because you're not watching that in your head, because you've released that through unconditional self and life acceptance, right? So the goal isn't to reach that final destination, right? The goal isn't to feel a certain way, right? The goal is to look at your worst case scenarios more rationally, with more rational perspectives. That is the goal, and that takes a lot of work. And those belief systems have to be aligned with the behavioural changes, right? I remember for ages, I disputed a lot about fear of rejection with HOCD, disputed it till the cows came home, but it wasn't budging because I didn't want to do my shame attacks. I didn't want to do my exposures that would have exposed me to my worst fear of being rejected. And I was wondering why it wasn't shifting, and I plateaued, and I thought, well, that's my lot, that's it. But the reality was that I was too scared to take that next level in the journey, and to do that next exposure, because it felt right. It didn't feel right. I put it off for a while. I thought I'll wait till I'm ready to do that. But there's never going to be a right time. There's never, ever going to be a right time to do it. In actual fact, you want to do it at the time when you feel the least ready. You want to do it at the time where you feel the most discomfort. And then you want to go through the fire, because there's no way that you're going to get around that, right? It's like when you're doing an assignment at university, right? There is going to come a time when you have to do that assignment, right? And if you keep putting it off to the last minute, wasting loads of time, it's going to get to the assignment day and you're going to miss the assignment and you're going to fail. And it's almost like that with the exposures. You put the exposure off, and you keep running out of time until you get towards the end of your life and you've stayed a prisoner with OCD because you didn't do the exposure, right? So there is going to come a day where you have to face the music. There is going to come a day where you have to think, right, I'm just going to try and go through the fire here and get my life back. And it's going to be that short-term pain for the long-term gain, right? And there's also, of course, there's no guarantee that you're going to get the long-term gain if you're still doing other compulsions and stuff, but it very much is like that. And there was lots of that in my journey. It was the short-term gratification to put off the later big exposure, right? I remember there were times with sleep, and I was very scared of not sleeping and having insomnia. And what I'd do was I would have these temporary fixes. So I'd have, sleeping melatonin tablets and masks to make it darker. And I had that when I was really scared of insomnia, right? And when I did those compulsions, yes, there were times when it helped me to sleep. There were some times when I got relief, but that chronic fear was still locked on. There were still times when I didn't sleep well, right? But doing those short-term fixes was just showing to the brain that I was still scared, right? So there had to come a day where I said, you know what, I'm going to put down these quick fixes. I'm going to go straight through the fire and run the risk of having a sleepless night. And there was a week when I did that, and maybe I slept 3 or 4 nights and I didn't sleep for 3 or 4 of them, right? And that was tough. really tough. My physical symptoms skyrocketed. I felt very hyper aware, no sleep, but I knew I had to do that. I had to go through that initial tough period in order to get the easier period down the line, right? And that's very much what you have to do. You have to earn the easier period by doing the hard work in the first instance, and that's how you do it, because otherwise you're just going to stay stuck forever, and that short-term pain for the long-term gain is better than just staying stuck forever, right? It's almost like when you do a diet. That first week when you transition from eating sort of unhealthy food that you might do normally to eating a healthy diet, when it's just, I don't know, eggs, chicken, fish, when you do that, the first couple of days, that's going to be really hard, right? Your sugar cravings are going to be very high. You're naturally going to want to gravitate back to what you was doing. But as you do, if you just get that first week out of the way, where you just push through that, it becomes easier. It becomes second nature, and you're able to do that on autopilot, and you get those sugar cravings go down, and you've earned the right to not have those sugar cravings. And it just gets easier. You build that momentum, and your frustration tolerance goes up, and that's what happens. So you've got to think of it like that in terms of the exposures. You need to go through the fire. You can't teeter around it. And as you do that, as you really face that exposure or whatever it is on your journey, alongside the belief changes, that is going to make things a lot better for you going forward. But whilst you put that off, OCD knows that. It knows you're scared. It's going to lurk in the background, and it's going to pounce and keep reminding you, yeah, you're still scared of that. And it will keep producing more of that fear and sensation in your environment, right? So you need to think about that. You need to take that really seriously, and trying to sort of go through the fire as quickly as possible within reason, because otherwise, like I said, you're not going to level up, And I remember as well, there was lots of, on the journey, you're going to feel resentful, right? I felt quite resentful towards others. They're not suffering. How can I suffer? I felt quite jealous of other people who were enjoying things in their life that I wanted to enjoy, relationships, enjoying the opposite sex, going to work, having a good career, earning lots of money, being healthy. And there was lots of resentment out towards others, lots of jealousy as well. I had lots of jealousy, and I'd look at myself, at home, stuck doing compulsions with no job and no sort of dating life or whatever. And I think, well, why me? But you also got to think, why not you, right? And holding on to that resentment and jealousy for other people was just futile. It wasn't getting me anywhere. And that also transitioned to sort of resentment and hate for myself, right? Especially when my acceptance was very conditional, very weak. I couldn't accept myself for the predicament that I was in. I couldn't accept myself for having OCD, because I thought the ego very much gets in the way, and you think, well, I'm above suffering. I should have this sense of entitlement where I don't suffer just because I've got a doubting disorder. I'm above that. But no, OCD doesn't give a shit. If OCD's got a reason to be scared, then it's going to be scared, and it's going to keep producing more of that until it learns to be less scared. So it owed me nothing, and I had to really see that. We think we're owed good mental health. We think we're owed all these things because we have OCD, but we're not. OCD has other ideas. Science has other ideas. Science will overlook your demands that you have in your head, because scientifically that can happen. It's like now, it's raining outside. I don't want it to rain, but it is. Scientifically, that's there. What good is it for me to say, it shouldn't be raining, or it's awful? No, you have to adjust and adapt. You have to put up the umbrella and put on the jacket and go out and embrace that. And that's what you have to do with OCD recovery. You have to really grit your teeth and show that determination and be aligned to what's happening, because fighting or demanding a different circumstance than OCD is like living in an alternate reality, right? And it just doesn't make a lot of sense, and it doesn't help you at all when you resist what's actually going on, because it's just that resistance. You're fighting that. We got to find ways to stop fighting. We got to drop the sword, because otherwise we're just going to stay embroiled in that cycle, and otherwise we're just going to keep getting more of those uncomfortable emotions, more of that resentment, more of that hate, more of that anxiety, more of that self-loathing, and it very much will stay locked on until you work at those perspectives. All right, so yeah, there's lots of realities to consider there, and I think another one as well is, the reality is with OCD is that as you move through the journey, you are going to have that factory reset. You are going to change, probably more so than any other person would have changed from another experience, right? You're going to become more rational. You're going to become more accepting. That old self that got you into this mess is going to be a thing of the past. And that requires a lot of consistency and a lot of work to change. And once you get to that point of recovery, you know, things are quite different in terms of yourself and how you view the world. And the reality is that that's going to make you feel a little bit more isolated and alone from others. And that's not saying that recovery is a bad thing, but it's just with the perspectives that you adopt, and other people haven't had the reason to adopt those perspectives, you're going to be able to really see the world from a more rational lens and be able to see the irrationality in the world. And with me in that regard, it's kind of changed me a little bit. You know, some of my interests and hobbies that I once had before OCD set in, I've gone off them a little bit. You know, I used to really love football, and I do still like football, but not to the same extent, because it's football in itself is quite an irrational thing, right? And I don't associate as much with things that are irrational anymore, just because I don't want to, right? And sometimes as well, when I'll be out with my friends and they'll have these certain belief systems about certain things, and of course they're very irrational people because they've not got the insights, but in many ways that can make me feel a little bit disconnected from the way that they are. I'm not saying that it's left me being alone with no friends, but it's almost like you feel a little bit more alone in a crowd of people. And again, I do have that good connection. I do resonate with them in certain things and still have those good friendships, which I'm lucky for. But that journey almost makes you not an outsider, but it changes your perspective on things. So you do have to be aware of that, but you know, putting in the foundations of acceptance and rational thinking was worth it, even if it meant that maybe there are one or two things that you sacrifice as a result. All right, so you've got to be aware that this recovery journey is going to be a factory reset, and that your life will change to some extent. I know we change by default, by just growing over time, with the new things that we learn and adopt through our lived experience. But the reality is that as you become more rational, you'll feel a little bit different to the rest of society. All right, and that's something that you need to be aware of, and that's not something that you can imprint with other people. Other people will very much stay consistent in their own ways, and they'll stay rigid in their own ways, and that's fine, you know. And we've got to see that we can't change the world, and that we've just got to navigate through our own internal compass that we learn from recovery. All right, so yeah, there's lots of different realities there of you know, the recovery journey and OCD. So yeah, hopefully you found those really insightful, and yeah, I'll catch you on the next video.